Hello Year 11, here it is then, paper 2. We know from speaking to lots of you that this is the one you find most challenging. So we're going to take you through the paper, looking at technique for each question and timings and sharing some top tips. But I want to start off by looking at those previous grade boundaries again. Now, they might change a little bit this year, they can do that, but I think it's really useful to have a look at roughly what you're aiming for. Now on the left-hand column we have the raw mark out of 64 because remember you are completing two papers, Elizabeth and Cold War. In the middle you have the mark you need per paper, so per topic, ish, and on the right what grade that equates to. So the first thing I want you to do is actually to have a look at the marks needed for your target grade roughly. So let's say your target grade is grade 5 or you want a grade 5. You're going to need 33 marks across both topics, Elizabeth and Cold War, 17-ish in each. And I also want you to have a look at the difference between the grades because as you can see the grade boundaries per topic are about 3 or 4 marks. So therefore every single mark counts, because you could only be looking at 3 marks away from your next grade boundary. Also to remind you, it's positive marking. So if you were to write the correct answer and then put a sentence that's incorrect at the end, marks will not be taken away for that incorrect sentence. We are looking to reward you. So when the examiner sees something that's right, they will reward you for that. So therefore, we are going to be resilient and we're going to answer every single question, even if we're not sure, because every single mark counts. And if it's in your head and not on the paper, the examiner can't reward you for it, can they? You can do it. So tomorrow, Year 11, you're going to be given 2 booklets, one with B4, Early Elizabethan England, and one that says P4, which is Superpower Relations and Cold War. You'll need to fill out both of those booklets with your name and your candidate number. You will have 1 hour and 50 minutes to complete both booklets. So that's going to be 55 minutes per booklet. So don't forget, you've got to complete both in that time, 55 minutes per booklet. So we'll start with a little bit of Elizabeth recap. Now, Elizabeth is broken down into 3 key topics. The first key topic is Queen, Government and Religion. So that means the problems that she had when she came to become Queen, that means how her government worked, and that means what changes she made to try and solve the conflict between Catholics and Protestants. Now, when you're revising Elizabeth, as I've said before, think about the rule of 3 and explain why requires 3 paragraphs and how far do you agree requires 3 paragraphs. So if you can learn 3 factors for each of the main topics, that's going to have you covered for both types of question. So what I would do now is have a look on the screen in front of you, and I've given you the overview of the key parts within key topic 1. See if you can write down 3 factors, so 3 factors that you could write for each. So challenges to Elizabeth on her accession, so 3 challenges when she became Queen, 3 parts of Elizabethan government, 3 parts of her settlement, 3 parts of the role of the Church of England, and so on. So if you pause the video now, give yourself 5 minutes and see if you can write down 3 factors for each. There we go, and then have a look at the screen. These are the factors that I would have chosen. So have a look, see if there's anything that you missed. If there's anything that you're not sure about on there, go and have a look at your revision guide, your online revision guide or the paper copy, just to refresh your memory. And then we'll move on to key topic 2. So key topic 2 is all about the challenges that Elizabeth faced at home. So that means from within England. So we're thinking about the Catholic plots there, but also from abroad as well. So thinking about how relations changed between England and Spain, and we call that Anglo-Spanish relations. So again, you're going to give yourself 5 minutes, pause the video and see if you can write down 3 factors for each of the topics that you have in front of you. So just check the responses there, and again, if there's anything that you're not sure of, any key terms, go and have a look in your online revision guide and refresh your memory. If not, make a list and make sure that you talk to a history teacher tomorrow before your exam and we can go through that with you. And then we have key topic 3. Now key topic 3 is all about the people in Elizabethan England. So thinking about education, how were they educated, the reasons why there was an increase in poverty, why was there a change in the treatment of the poor, leisure activities, what do people do for fun? And we'll break that down into rich and poor. The reasons why there was more exploration. So Tudors at this point travelled further than they had ever done before. So can you think of 3 reasons why that was? What was the impact of Drake's circumnavigation of the globe? Remember when he sailed all the way around the globe, what happened because of that? And then reasons for the failure of the colonies at Virginia. Now that was the very last topic that we studied in our lessons, so sometimes that gets overlooked a little bit when you're revising, so make sure that you can give 3 reasons why Virginia failed. So again, pause the video for 5 minutes, see if you can do your 3 factors, and then we'll look at the next slide and see if you can compare that to your answers. There we go, so we've got our 3 factors for each. Please just be really careful when we've got treatment of the poor. We need to look at changes in treatment of the poor. That's what the exam specification says. So it's important that we know what is different. And overall, what is different there is that the government are classifying the poor. They're putting the poor into groups and they're distinguishing between those that they think are the lazy, the ones that could work and don't, and the ones that are in need of help. And that's what these laws are trying to support. Reasons for exploration, so trade, new technology, ship design, and reasons for the failure of Virginia there as well. So just making sure that you understand all of the points on there, and if not, go back and look at your revision guide and double check. You will be asked to describe one feature of part of the Elizabeth course. This is the same technique as the medicine paper, so you need to aim for 2 or 3 sentences about the topic in the question. The 2 examples in front of you, so describe one feature of early Elizabethan government and describe one feature of vagabonds, have not been seen in an exam for a little while, so I think it's possible that they could come up tomorrow. Please make sure that you know what a vagabond is, or vagabondage. It's the same thing, so it's essentially homeless people who did not have jobs and they roamed. That means they travelled around the countryside begging for money and sometimes stealing or committing other crimes just to survive. The other thing I think you could possibly look out for tomorrow is describe one feature of early Elizabethan society. So we'd be thinking about nobles at the top, so the wealthy that owned most of the land and were very powerful and could be part of government, and at the other end the vagabonds at the bottom, so the homeless people without jobs that roamed the countryside looking for work. Explain why, again the same as medicine, so we're going to give our point followed by our evidence followed by our explanation. So your sentence starters would be one reason why, using the words of the question in your answer, and then you introduce your evidence, your facts, by writing for example, and then following that up with this meant that. So in other words, how does your evidence link to the question? Put meaning on it. My top tip for this kind of question is to make sure you annotate it before you start. So underline the key words in it, underline the key time periods in it, and just remember the bullet points are there to prompt you, but if the bullet points don't make sense to you or you don't know what one of them means, you don't have to use them. And if your target grade is a grade 4, we're looking for 2 paragraphs. Try and do 1 paragraph from the bullet points and 1 from your own knowledge. But you don't have to use the bullet points. They don't always help you. All right? So don't panic. On the next few slides, you have some examples of responses to different explain why questions. The topics have been really carefully chosen because we've not seen them in an exam for a little while, so I think perhaps they're more likely to come up. So read through the responses carefully, pick out where there are clear points and evidence and where the evidence has been linked back to the question. What you can also do is have a look at a similar style of question, but a how far do you agree? And you can use the information in the explain why response to plan a response to the how far do you agree. So for example, if we were being asked to explain why Anglo-Spanish relations declined, we've got the hiring of Francis Drake, Elizabeth's actions in the Netherlands, and increased Spanish threat. We could use those 3 points to answer the question. The main reason why there was a decline in Anglo-Spanish relations 1569 to 85 was Elizabeth's actions in the Netherlands. How far do you agree? So we would put Elizabeth's actions in the Netherlands on the agree side, the hiring of Francis Drake on the disagree side, and the increase in Spanish threat on the disagree side. So for each of these responses over the next few slides, it's worth pausing the video, reading really carefully to identify the points, and then planning the how far do you agree. Then our final question for Elizabeth is the how far do you agree question. It's worth 16 marks. Just like medicine, you're going to get a choice. So it's worth spending a couple of minutes looking at both questions carefully, underlining the key words and deciding which one you know most about, because the one you know most about is the one that you're going to write about. And then you're going to draw your table with your evidence to support and to challenge before you write your final response. So let's have a look at an example of this and how we could plan for it. You can see here an example of a table in response to the question. I really want you to create a table tomorrow before you answer your how far do you agree, because it helps to put all your ideas down. You'll notice in this table that I have not used the second bullet point, which was the execution of Babington, because I don't feel that I need to answer this question in full. So it's a reminder, use the bullet points if they help you, but if they confuse you or you don't understand them, you do not have to use them in your answer. You will not be marked down. And this is a full response to the question. And you'll notice that at the top there is a clear judgment with a reason for that judgment. So if your target is a 6 or above, you should be providing a reason for your decision in that introduction, because that is setting your criteria. We've then got 3 areas of content covered. So we've got Revolt of the Northern Elves, which is mentioned in the question, Rodolphi and Throckmorton plot, and the Babington plot. For each paragraph, it's structured a little differently to an explain why response. Rather than having point, evidence and explanation, we've got point, evidence and a judgment at the end of the paragraph linked to the question. You also may have used a structure which required you to put your view first, whether that's agree or disagree, then the opposing view, and then a decision of despite this, I still think. That also works well. So if that's been working for you in class up until this point, please continue to do that. So now we look at Cold War. Now Cold War again is divided up into 3 topics. Our first topic is 1943 to 56, and we would call that the development of the Cold War. So looking at why it was that the USSR and the USA fell out in the first place, and what events can we look at which show that that tension was increasing. So with that in mind, it's really useful to look at key dates and to think about 3 events that take place in each of those key time periods. So I've given you 5 time periods or events up on the screen now, and all I want you to do is to write down 3 events or 3 things that happen either in that time period or in that year, because that would form a plan for your narrative account. So rule of 3 again, can you give me 3, potentially 4 events for each time period? So pause the video for 3 minutes and write that down. So there we go, there's some suggestions for you. So 43 to 46, you might have Tehran, Yalta, Potsdam, Iron Curtain speech. You might also have had the telegrams in there. 45 to 47, you could have Potsdam, the atomic bomb, the telegrams, the Truman Doctrine. 47 to 49, Truman Doctrine, Marshall Plan. You might have had Cominform. You might have had NATO maybe. Berlin crisis, so we could talk about Trisonia, the blockade, the airlift, the separation of Germany, NATO. Number 5, for Hungary, you might have told the story of Hungary. So Rákosi in charge, then Nagy, who threatened to leave the Warsaw Pact, the invasion, communism returning, increase of Soviet control in Eastern Europe. So let's have a look next at Cold War topic 2 and see if we can do the same thing. Cold War topic 2 covers the period of time from 58 to 68, and what we're looking at there really are 3 Cold War crises. So what's happening in Cuba in that time, what's happening in Germany in that time, and what's happening in Czechoslovakia. So with that in mind, you've got 5 time periods or events on the screen in front of you. I would like you to write down 3 things that you could write about for each of those time periods or events. So pause the video for 3 minutes and have a go. So there we go, check the screen and see what you got and maybe what you were missing as well. The Berlin crisis, the way that we think about the Berlin crisis and the story of it is the acronym RUSK. So refugees, ultimatum, summits, Kennedy, and then actually a W for wall. If you're asked about the Berlin crisis as a narrative, they could give you 2 possible time periods. They could give you 58 to 61, so that's up to the actual building of the wall. They could also give you 58 to 63, and the only difference there is that actually Kennedy visited Berlin in 63 to show solidarity with the people there. Cuba, again, we could have 2 time periods for that. So 59 to 61 takes you up to the Bay of Pigs invasion. They ask you about Cuba in 62. We're talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis itself. So that's the story of the 13 days in October of 62 when there was very nearly a nuclear war. So you need to write about the story of that. And then events in Czechoslovakia in 68, we're looking at what was happening in Czechoslovakia, why were people unhappy, then the fact that Dubček took charge. Then he introduced the Prague Spring reforms, which triggered the Soviet invasion, and then we get the Brezhnev Doctrine at the end of that. Now the final Cold War topic takes us from 1970 to 1991. So there are 2 aspects to that. The first bit is détente, so that period of cooperation which happened from 1970 up to 1978. So you're going to need 3 events there that would show that there was that period of cooperation. Then 1979 to 83, so that's where relations got worse, because that's our second Cold War period really. So after the invasion of Afghanistan, what then happens? Then 84 to 89, where relations improve because we have Gorbachev and Reagan working together. The events of 1989, so very busy that year because we've got the fall of the Berlin Wall. We've got as well communist governments being replaced in some of the satellite states, and then 1989 to 1991, which takes us up to the end of the Cold War. So see if you could write down 3 events for each of those time periods, because if you can do that, that's going to mean that you could answer any narrative question on those time periods. So pause the video for 3 minutes and have a go. There we go, and then check the screen, and if there are any topics on there that you still don't know, look in your online revision guide, refresh your memory this evening, make a list of any concerns that you have. You'll have time to talk to your history teachers tomorrow, so don't panic. So what you've done is covered your narrative questions. You will also be asked about why an event is important for a situation. Now often what they'll ask you is why an event was important for superpower relations. Now that just means the relationship between the USA and the USSR. They might also ask you for the development of the Cold War, which is really kind of similar. So you've got 5 events up there, and all I want you to do is to decide whether they made relations better or worse, or did they increase or decrease tension. So pause the video for 2 minutes and have a go. And now for key topic 2 again, did relations get better or worse? Was tension increased or decreased? And Cold War topic 3, you've got 8 events up there, so better or worse, increased or decreased tension. Question 1 requires you to write about a consequence of a particular event. And a consequence is going to ask you or require you to write about what comes after the event, because a consequence is what happens because of something. It might help you to remember this by writing the word after above the question before you start to answer it. So let's have a look at what a response would be to explain one consequence of the Prague Spring reforms. Now on the left you can see a really weak response, and it's a common error. So this person has written, one consequence was that Dubček was made leader of Czechoslovakia. He wanted to keep communism but make it more popular. He called this socialism with a human face. The problem with this answer is that it's not looking at a consequence of the Prague Spring reforms, it's looking at what happened before the Prague Spring reforms. So although the information is correct, Dubček was made leader of Czechoslovakia, that's not a consequence of the reforms. That happened before they were introduced. So we'd be looking for something like the response on the right. One consequence was that the Soviet Union tightened their control over Czechoslovakia and Eastern Europe. The Soviets invaded in August 1968, removed Dubček and replaced him with a hardline communist leader before introducing the Brezhnev Doctrine. This was a consequence of the Prague Spring reforms because Brezhnev felt that the Soviets went too far and would have led to Soviets losing control over the satellite states. So action was needed to make sure this didn't happen. So on the left, you've got your cause, and on the right, you have your consequence, and it's fully developed and explained. So question 2 will be our narrative question, and we need to think with a narrative, you're really looking for about 3 to 4 events linked together that you can write about. So our example here is a narrative account analysing the events of the Berlin crisis 48 to 49. Now a sentence starter, if you're stuck for this question, just start with in the beginning, and that will get you into the kind of flow, because that's often the barrier for this question. So in the beginning, and write down what happens at the beginning of that story. Useful phrases to link events together is this meant that, as a result of this, and then explain how they link together. So on the example in front of you, you've got those linking sentences in green. So pause the video for 2 minutes and read through and identify how events are linked together. So the final question is an importance of question. You'll be given a choice of 3 and you're going to write about 2 of them. You'll notice this is worth 8 marks per question, which means it needs to be longer than your consequences of response. So what we're looking for here is a reason why an event is important for a situation and trying to give 2 examples of that. So for example, if you have a question which asks you to explain the importance of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan for superpower relations, you're going to look at what happened after the invasion to the relationship between the USA and the Soviet Union and try and give 2 examples of that. So in this case, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan was important for superpower relations because it made relations worse and decreased tension. So that's my overall point. I'm saying it's important because it's made relations worse and it's increased tension. I then need to give 2 examples of how it made relations worse and increased tension. So I've looked at the end of détente and SALT II and the Carter Doctrine, and then my second factor is the election of Reagan. But I'm constantly using the words of the question throughout my answer. When this style of question has come up before, it predominantly asks about the importance of an event for superpower relations, so the relations between the USA and the USSR, and they're either going to get better or worse, and you need to give examples of that. Or it will ask you about the development of the Cold War. So again, does it increase tension or decrease tension? The other way that it might come up is to ask you how an event affects Soviet control of a particular area. So in other words, does it lead to an increase in control or a decrease? But either way, it's important that you try and give 2 examples to support your point. So if relations are worse, give 2 examples of how it became worse because of that event.